Welcome to Planet Poetry. My name is Peter Kenny.
And I'm Robin Houghton. In this episode, we interview Persian poet Alireza Abiz about his Shearsman collection, The Kindly Interrogator.
And Robin and I discuss the weirdness of twins, the crows of bereavement, and the joys of pedantry.
The crows of bereavement. We're all wondering what the hell that is. Oh, Peter, it's nearly Christmas, is it? Is it nearly Christmas, or what, are you feeling Christmassy?
It's just turned into December, hasn't it? Yeah, I do actually love Christmas. This is my favourite time of year traditionally. Lately, I've really enjoyed being a Santa every year. I
can imagine you being a very kindly, fun Santa.
Well, I like to think of myself as a sort of surprisingly youthful, gorgeous young Santa, but actually, I think I'm perfectly cast for it.
Well, I was with the grandchildren at the weekend, actually, seeing Santa at the Bluebell Railway, the real Santa.
The worst part of being a Santa is the nylon beard, the immense nylon beard.
Oh, gosh.
But I love what the children's responses are. I walked in last year, I was doing it in my wife's school. She's a head teacher of a little village school. So I walked into a classroom and the first thing someone shouted was, "Have you got out of prison?" And I was like, what? It's just kind of strange curveball. So there's some Santa movie where Santa winds up in prison for a while because the kids all seem to know the names of the reindeer. So my favourite bit of Santaing in the last couple of years was going into a class full of children and saying, "My reindeer are outside, Steve, Doris and Bob." And the whole class just erupted in outrage that that's not the names of those reindeer.
Enough of all that.
Yeah.
Let's hear what Alireza Abiz had to say to Peter.
Alireza Abiz is an Iranian poet, literary critic and award-winning translator and podcaster. His sixth collection, called The Desert Monitor, is about to be published shortly in English and Persian. Today we're going to talk about The Kindly Interrogator, recently published by Shearsman Books, which features translations made by Alireza and W.N. Herbert, and it is a selection from his first 5 Persian collections. So, Alireza, welcome back to the Planet Poetry podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Last time we spoke, it was in your capacity as chairman of the judges for the Sarah Maguire Prize for Poetry and Translation. So it's really good to actually have you on to talk about your own work this time. But before we start that, I kind of think it would be useful for people to have a bit of context for your work. You were someone who was born in Iran in 1968, so you've had that thing of certainly living in interesting times. You know, when you were a boy, there was the revolution overthrowing the Shah, and in 1978 to 79, that revolution happened and the Ayatollah Khomeini returned to lead the country. Then there was that terrible war with Iraq, which lasted between 1980 and 88 and cost at least 500,000 lives. Now, you've been based in the UK for some time now. How would you describe to a friend from the UK how these historic events shaped you as a person and as a writer?
You described those events very well, I would say. As a child, it might be very interesting that I took part in the revolution. Although I was living in the countryside, is a faraway village, but even our village was taken up with this fever of revolution. And I was a 9-year-old child, but I would take part in the demonstrations. And even once I remember that me and my friends, we tried to capture the gendarmerie station in the village.
Oh, wow. A proper revolutionary.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so I went to school at those days. Everyone was revolutionary. Mainly the literature which was available to us at first were mainly leftist, communist type of literature. So books by Maxim Gorky and those type of stuff, which soon were replaced by mainly religious books. So I experienced this censorship as a reader of literature since a very young age.
Yeah.
So one day I come to school and I see that some of the books that I used to borrow from the library are not on the shelves anymore. And
Wow.
there is one very particular instance that really actually haunted my teenage years, is when I was reading a novel and there were only a few pages left before I could finish the novel. And it was in the break time. And the school clerk came and looked at the cover, asked me to see the book, and he just threw it in half. And he said, "You can't be reading this book because it's a communist book." And the book was a novel about the French resistance movement during the Nazi occupation of France by a writer called Jean Lafitte. And so I was really angry and upset because it was a very interesting story and he didn't let me to finish the book. So then came the war. I took part in the war as a child, 16 years old.
Yeah.
So that was also a major experience for me. And the disillusionment that came after the war, because we believed it's a kind of holy war, everywhere is spirituality. But then we went to war and we saw the naked violence and the ugliness of war. And yeah, that was quite an experience.
Before I spoke to you today, I was looking back at some news recordings and things from that war just to remind myself, because it's quite a long time now, but what a terrible, appalling, bloodthirsty conflict that was. And as a boy, that's such an amazing formative event in your life. Something I picked up from the introduction to this collection, which I really liked, and it's sort of describing your work, and it's saying the impact of his work depends on the extreme tension between the calm of its surface and the unfathomable uncertainty revealed to occupy its depths. And I kept finding that as I read, that there was this sort of surface calmness and everything seemed quite under control, but you couldn't be taken in by this calmness. Underneath, there were all kinds of strange things lurking there. I'm going to ask you to read a poem that I've been puzzling over, The Café.
Yes, The Café was taken from my first collection, Stop, We Must Get Off, which was published in 1998. But the poem was written earlier, probably in the early 1990s. The Café. We came out of the café at 5 for a short walk in the street. For a short walk in the street, we came out of the café at 5. A man kept shaking his head in the butcher's on the right. In the butcher's on the right, a man kept shaking his head. When at 5 they beheaded us, we also shook our heads. We also shook our heads when at 5 they beheaded us.
Thank you. Now, I've been dying to talk to you about this, because it's one of those poems. When I first encountered it, I thought, this is so bizarre. It's so repetitive. And then I began to think about the repetition is like you're having to repeat facts, almost like to an interrogator, but every time it's slightly different. And there's sense of hypervigilance as well. Who notices somebody standing inside a butcher's just shaking his head, and that one tiny gesture, it sort of triggers the poet to think of beheadings. And I just think, to me, it seemed very alien, but kind of, there's all this mirroring in it. It was almost making me think of reflections, looking through to the butchers and maybe seeing something reflected there as well. Can you put me out of my misery a bit. What was going on in your head then?
Well, yes. To be honest, to myself, sometimes when I read it, because at that time, beheading today is something that everyone knows about, especially after the ISIS and the beheading videos that were going viral, and so everyone knows about it. Something that really happened. To me, sometimes I think this was a kind of visionary poem about the future, because when I wrote it in the 1990s, these incidents were not that frequent, or at least were not known to the public. So what I'm talking here is not about an actual instance of beheading, but I think I was referring to the severe suppression that I was feeling at the time.
Yeah.
As a young writer, young poet, the 1990s, actually my teenage years and my undergraduate years, they were terrible years, to be honest. After the war, the crackdown on intellectual was intense. Arts and literature were being scrutinized and heavily censored. So it was this idea of getting suffocated, and we needed some fresh air. So this image of naked violence in a butcher's shop getting beheaded was actually a kind of metaphor for the fact that we were deprived of art, literature, everything that to us appeared like fresh air. And that metaphor was translated or transformed into this idea of being beheaded by some unknown force.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because there's something about the repetitions in that poem that make it quite heavy, as if there's poetry trying to escape from a situation. It's one of those poems that I've just read over and over, and its meanings multiply. The next poem I'd like you to read is Puberty in the Trenches. This seems to me to be more autobiographical.
That's absolutely true. This poem describes some of my experiences in the battlefront. So, as I told you, I was 16 and a high school student in year 10. And then half of the boys in my school had already gone to the war front. And all of them, they volunteered. So it's not something that we were forced. But because of the atmosphere, this patriotism mixed with a kind of religious fervor, actually encouraged everyone to go to the battlefront. I volunteered 4 times and I was rejected 3 times because I was too young. But at the end, I managed to somehow lie to the recruiters and went to Kurdistan, which was still part of the battlefront, but not with the Iraqi forces. It was a kind of domestic war with the Kurdish separatist groups. And one word that is used here, Komole was actually one of those parties. It still exists. And at that time, they were in armed conflict with the government. The poem is called The Puberty in the Trenches. Fall in. You stand in line in Palangon Mosque, your knapsack being filled with tins of tuna and gifts of nuts. Magazine pouches ornament your waist. Fall in. In a long queue, you climb Mount Shahu, listening to the breeze through the grass and the river flowing down in the valley. Sit behind that boulder and let the river below pass through the valley. The men carry water in white containers. Sit behind that boulder and aim at the bull's eye. Fire. Spring grass is being crushed underfoot. it has covered the graves and the moustaches of Akbar Komole. Forward! Your boots are too big for your feet. When you turn the first corner, you see Dervish Fares with his long carbine, rolling a cigarette. You are scared. Grip your M1 tightly. In your Israeli-made sleeping bag, you sleep comfortably with no report of guns. In your wet dream, you have been left behind by the company which has gone up to the front line. In the tamarisk bushes, with a tin of hot water, I wash my body for the sake of ghusl janabat. It's an obligation for me to purify, to get close to Allah.
Thank you. That's a really great portrait of a boy in the trenches. And I love the way he's still obeying the rules, ritually washing himself after a wet dream. That almost schoolboy kind of devotion to doing the right thing while, having your M1 to hand and sleeping in your Israeli sleeping bag and so on. There's lots of war poetry, particularly famous in this country, people like Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon and so on. And that's all kind of very dramatic, but I like the way it seems to be characteristic of your work that a small detail calmly presented actually is like the tip of an iceberg for a really appalling situation.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I just try to, as you rightly said, the topic is very dramatic. It's a child going to a deadly war in a mountain. So even the terrain is not that friendly. So the geography of the space, everything is so foreign to him. Even this Dervish Fares, he is not an enemy. He is in the same company as the soldier, but he's scared of him because of his appearance, because he is a dervish. He has a long, old carbine, and he speaks a different language. He's a local Kurd. So as a child, I was really scared. Try to portray that child in a completely strange landscape. Yeah. But at the same time, I don't know if you noticed that he is left behind, but this is not that he was left behind. They didn't take me to the operation because I was a child. So they let me sleep while the others have gone to the battle. But they just let me sleep because I was a child. I was considered a child. So they didn't give me dangerous duties. And I don't know if I was able to take this message across, but this was part of it. The other part was that, as you said, I was a devout Muslim as a child soldier, and I cared for my religious obligation. This Israeli-made sleeping bag was also another small detail, because Iran and Israel are considered like arch enemies, but at the same time we used Israeli sleeping bags, which were the best. They were light and warm.
Yeah.
And everyone competed to get hold of one. And again, I was given one because I was a child.
Well, it's nice to know in some ways that you were being taken care of in a bizarre sort of way. So, talking about the religion, will you read Guardian of the Faith?
Guardian of the Faith. I jumped out from behind the rock, barred his way, and cried, "Halt! Hands up!" I searched his pockets, found nothing, shouted, "Halt! Hands up!" I took him in, laid him down, rolled him up, and stuck him to the wall. I searched his shoes and socks, found nothing, shouted, "Halt! Hands up!" I searched him from head to toenail. I searched the inside of his pants, the roof of his mouth, the corner of his eye, the whole of his arse. I extracted blood from his veins, tissue from his muscles, gray cells from his brain, and neurons from his nerves. I removed his balls and fried them in a pan. I searched through his mind with a magnifying glass and found nothing. That heretic had hidden his dirty thoughts somewhere else, somewhere a short distance above his head or about his body, in an aura that I could and could not see. He glanced at me, grinned, and was gone. I was left standing there like a guardian of the faith.
That's great. The eye of the poem searching clothes, the intimate parts of a body, taking a magnifying glass to his mind, trying to find the dirty thoughts of a heretic. The thing about it is there's almost a tone of sympathy for the guardian of the faith, even though his searching is so kind of demeaning for his captive and also himself in a way. I think that's quite characteristic of how you write as well. You know, your sympathy seems to be on both sides of that argument.
Exactly, probably because he is not successful in finding what he's looking for. Yeah. So we feel sorry for this person. But there is an interesting story behind this poem. When it was published in my second collection, the censor authorities in Iran, they asked me to remove it.
Oh.
Because I wanted to keep it. So I said I have actually written this about the Taliban rule, because at that time the Taliban had just came into Afghanistan, the first round. Now we are having them for the second round. It was 2003, I think, 2002-3. And I said that, well, I meant it for Taliban. I'm not talking about the Iranian society. Well, I actually wrote this in response to the morality police, which we have something called the morality police. So they are walking in the street and arresting women who are not dressed properly, according to them.
Yeah.
So they take them in and they question them, and sometimes they let them go. Sometimes they take them to their station and get commitment letter from them, and even they might take them to court. So I said I have written them about Afghanistan society, not about us. So at the end, the guy said that, okay, if you want to publish it, you have to add a title which shows you are talking about Afghanistan. So in the Persian version, the title is, this is the title of the Persian, is addressed to Mullah Omar in Afghanistan. Mullah Omar was the leader of Afghanistan at the time. Yeah. And also some of the words were just deleted and blank. So I kept 3 dots. So the words like balls or arse, these kind of words, they were not typed. They were just left blank for the reader to guess.
I think some of our listeners who are writers working in, the US or the UK, it'll be such a shock to them to think that they have to negotiate with the guardians of the morality for the country before they can even publish a poem, But I suppose the other side of that is that these people think your poetry is so important that it has to be policed and watched like a hawk, because a lot of people would like that attention. Actually, this kind of leads us on to the next poem I'd like to ask you to read, which is The Kindly Interrogator, which is the name of this collection as well.
The Kindly Interrogator. I have a kindly interrogator. He is interested in philosophy and free verse. He admires Churchill and drinks green tea. He is delicate and bespectacled. He is lightly bearded and has a woman's voice. He is polite and doesn't insult me. He has never beaten me up. He has never demanded false confessions. He says, only write the truth. I say, on my life.
So again, there's that strange identification with the interrogator. I think you say somewhere that the interrogator might be your best reader. Somebody who's paying you so much attention and kind of just so absorbed by what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. I mean, sometimes they overread, but it's true that the censors are the people who take you the most seriously. Because I had this chat with the chief censor of poetry when I wanted to publish the Desert Monitor, which didn't get a license, so I couldn't publish it inside Iran. But then I told him that, look, who is going to read poetry? It will be published in 500 copies. Probably 200 copies will be sold maximum. And so why are you so anxious about every single word? And then he gave me a very convincing answer. He said that, look, this is very funny and contradictory because he himself was a poet. And he said, I am a poet. I don't believe in censorship. I don't think there is anything good about censorship. But someone might read your book. There are people who read this book and they will go and they will sue me. They will complain against us who are responsible for licensing, and they will take me to court. So I am actually protecting you and myself from those people who are employed to read literature and to probably they don't like this system, they don't like us, they are outside the government, security forces, those type of stuffs, religious clerics, and they will use this against me and against the whole administration. So, yeah, that's also part of the story.
It's making me think of a bit of Kafka or something, the kind of strange, the absurdity of those negotiations.
Exactly.
It's amazing. Can I ask you to read The Dining Hall? That's from a collection. Can you say the name of the collection?
Yes. Kuhsangi, 13/1 Kuhsangi Street.
And could you say what the significance of that street is? Because it appears in quite a few of the poems from that collection.
Yes. That's the address of the intelligence department in Mashhad, which is the center of Khorasan province. That's exactly the address where I was taken for interrogation when I was an undergraduate student, 1991, 1992. So the whole collection is mainly about the theme of interrogation. And it was published here in London. I couldn't publish it in Iran. So the Persian collection was also published in London. The Dining Hall. I would like to live long enough to go back one day to Mashhad, to 13/1 Kuhsangi Street, to knock at the little window, for the green-hatted Sayyid to open the door, to enter, to see all of you in the dining hall, eating and telling jokes, each of your faces unique. One of you has a sick wife, and another has lost his father. Someone's daughter has a new suitor. Another's son has been admitted to college. A neighbor's child has fallen down the stairs, and you have bought a new TV. I would like to watch you and look into your eyes.
That ending is so ambiguous. I love it. That it would be possible to take that as a kind of almost a longing and a nostalgic feeling, but it also feels like a kind of threat as well, that you're the one doing the peering in and watching that person and looking into the eyes.
Exactly. Because the way they interrogated at that time, not now, they have probably changed tactic, was that they would sit you facing the wall and they would tell you that you cannot turn back. So you were not able to see their faces. So I never saw the faces of any of my interrogator, except one of them that I saw accidentally when I looked back and he suddenly entered the room and he was very angry that I saw him. So this is a kind of wishful thinking that I hope one day I could see them and I could look into their eyes. It's a kind of vindictive feeling.
The act of looking throughout your poems is a very highly charged thing. I mean, there's early on you even have an uneasy poem about a black cat that's looking at you. That black cat becomes extremely sinister. The fact of just being observed is supercharged. There's something very loaded and threatening about simply being looked at.
Yes, I mean we live in a world of camera, surveillance and all that, so it makes sense.
Well, this collection, The Kindly Interrogator, ends with a poem called Iftar. It's got 2 words in it, azan, which I had to look these up, so I'll share it with our listeners, is the call to prayer, and iftar is the meal eaten after sunset during Ramadan.
Exactly. And, the main theme of azan, Allahu Akbar, also means God is great.
Yes.
And this is the refrain in the call to prayer. So it is significant in that sense. And it is also significant in the sense that it's a daily word for every Muslim. So if you are surprised, you would say that. If you need help, you would say that. In protests, people shout that, and we can see here what happens again with the same word.
Yeah.
So, iftar. The girl opposite looked like my cousin. We sat on the white cloth. I was offered dates and took one. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Azan came to a close and iftar began. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. On the lips of those being shot and on the lips of those doing the shooting.
Well, I really like that poem. I like the idea that it does the 2 things at the same time, which is, what all good poetry does. And there's that sense of God being bigger than these things, and also God being the thing that divides them. It's
exactly. No, I mean that's absolutely true. Those who kill in the name of God, and people who, while being killed, they again take refuge in the name of God. So It is really contradictory, but that's how things have happened and still continue to happen.
Alireza, thank you so much for giving us your time and talking us through this collection. I think it's a really good overview. It's been really well put together. It makes me really tempted to read your other works, because your new collection is going to be is coming out in English as well, isn't it? So
yes,
that we'll have to snap that up. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking about your own work rather than supporting other people's work. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I thought it was amazing to hear what Alireza had to say. Someone who's lived through all of that. It's so different from one of us nice, cozy Westerners imagining what it's like in a war zone. And the way he just described, he was a 9-year-old boy caught up in the revolution and what it meant to him, right from the first story he told of the book that he was reading, that the school teacher just said, no, you can't be reading that, and threw it out. And then the rest of his experiences. And I thought his poetry was really impactful, but it has this lovely deadpan quality about it that really appealed to me.
Yeah, it's made of small details and not, hysterical or whatever. And I like the idea of the war poem. He had a wet dream and he woke up and washed himself and everything. And while he was doing that, the rest of the company had left him sleeping because he was only a kid.
Yes.
The puberty in the trenches, that poem was called. They've all gone off to this life and death struggle, and he's there, sort of obediently washing himself and cleansing himself of this sort of awkward teenage thing, and, in his Israeli made sleeping bag.
Yeah. I thought the poem, The Guardian of the Faith, was really amazing. You're listening to this description and it's quite gruesome, the way he's searching this enemy soldier, and, becomes quite surreal. And yet it ends up with the enemy soldier just kind of vanishing, and there's this young guardian of the faith. I thought it was really... I really, really enjoyed that poem. And then when he talked about how it got censored, that was also amazing. You can imagine this poem with all these ellipses, instead of certain words, kind of an erasure poem, if you like.
Yeah. He does seem to be able to see both sides of the coin. He seems to have a kind of sympathy for people that were interrogating him. He sees them as humans, and he describes people in the room that had been his interrogators. And
yes.
they,
with their families and their,
problems with their neighbours, and they're all just everyday stuff. And yet he tells about how he personally went there and kind of was interrogated and wasn't able to see these people's faces.
Yeah.
But still he has that compassion for the people, and the idea that his, censor is his closest reader,
Yes, completely powerful stuff. And what he ends on, the poem that he ends on, and he describes how people were saying, God is great, but both the killers and the being killed, both sides invoking God. I
was really pleased to be able to talk to him. He is a champion of other people's work, and he also has his own podcast in Persian as well.
Oh, does he?
Yeah. He's a very accomplished writer and translator and scholar. And it's just great to be able to tune into that other world, and that's one of the things I'm liking about what we're doing.
Yeah.
Is that the way we're opening doors into other people's experiences.
Yes, yes.
To actually speak to somebody that...
Been interrogated, been censored, come up close at hand to all these things, fought in the war.
I mean, I don't know about you, but sometimes I get the impression that I'm, in my own writing, trying to mine my past for things that are kind of unfair or issues. But if you've lived a life like he's lived, that those, you don't have to search for your subject. Your subject is right there, isn't it? Your subject is inescapable.
Yes.
And there's a steeliness about his response to it that doesn't get swept up in hatreds or anything like that. It's just a poet's response.
Extraordinary. The artist's response to atrocious events, indeed.
We've been talking about The Kindly Interrogator by Alireza Abiz, published by Shearsman and translated from the Persian by W.N. Herbert with the author. I think it's highly recommended. So in this time of pre-festive sniffles, colds, agues, horrible diseases and so on...
Which we're not allowed to have. We're not allowed to have anything apart from the C word. You're not allowed to say that either, so...
So have you found time to squeeze anything in?
Yes. Last Thursday, I was in Lewes for the Needle Writers evening, and one of the readers was Peter Wallace. He's someone whose work I'm not familiar with, but I was really taken with his reading. So I bought the pamphlet that he had for sale called Articles of Twinship, and it's published by Bear Fiction.
Oh,
the long-lamented Bear Fiction. I didn't realise, actually, that they'd published pamphlets as well as that lovely magazine. But this actually won the Bear Fiction debut poetry collection competition. It was judged by Andrew Macmillan. And that was, I think, 2015 or 2016. Basically, the story behind it is that Peter is an identical twin. He and his brother John were two of four boys. Quite a lot of the thinking behind these poems is, what is it to be a twin? But also, what is it to be a twin in a family of four boys, where two are not twins and two are twins? And basically, the twins are kind of like one unit, or they're referred to as the twins when they're growing up.
Yeah.
This is a typical situation, apparently, if one is an identical twin, exacerbated by the fact that a lot of people, even the parents, struggled at times to tell them apart. And he introduced these poems. It was fascinating. He said, even you would look at photos of yourself as a boy, and you weren't sure if it was you or your brother in the photo.
That's weird, yeah.
It's slightly weird, and so this pamphlet covers the early years, if you like, and there's a sequence running through it with the title School Career, and these are very short little poems that go through, quite pithy, interspersed with longer pieces to do with twinship and his growing up.
I've always actually had an absolute horror of the idea of being a twin.
Oh, yes, you've written some poems, haven't you, about the idea of meeting a doppelganger, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the idea of being one of two just freaks me out for some. It's completely irrational, and I'm sure if you had a twin, you'd be all fine with it. But I find my own self irritating and annoying enough. But to have that kind of reflected back at you by somebody that looks like you and occupies the same area and often knows the same people and all the rest of it, I would find that utterly nightmarish.
Yeah, yeah.
It's always seemed to me like a really disturbing idea, but I think that probably says more about me than actually the condition of being a twin. But
the tragic irony of this story is that Peter is no longer really identical to John, because John, I think it was in his 30s, he had a brain cyst which was operated on and left him with very complex medical needs. And so, and in fact, the next collection and some of the poems he read were to do with that. But the overall feeling was this fabulous sense of love and positivity, and it was a great reading. I should say also that the sequence that goes through it, School Career, there are lots of references to the alphabet, to letters. Like, he sees himself as like double letters in a word. So the reference to these double letters, like two L's or whatever, comes up quite a lot. So I'll read a couple of the short ones, shall I, just to give you a...
Yeah, that'd be great.
Family likeness. Multiples of 11 are our cousins once removed.
That was it?
That was it, yeah. Entrance. John goes in first, a capital to my lowercase. And this is the one I particularly like. Sitting. Together in the common room, the Fisher twins are standing over us like F's in coffee. I like the visual. It's a visual gag, and that's another point. He talks about twins who are actually a girl and a boy being like they're twins, but they're like C and K. And I had thought about that for such a long time. Well, C and K, of course, they often go together, but they're not identical. And there's a lovely poem about how they cross the road together as twins, and they kind of anticipate the traffic together, and they do everything together like synchronized ponies or something. There's a lot of humour in it, but a lot of poignancy as well. So, but a beautiful pamphlet. So, Articles of Twinship by Peter Wallace, published by Bear Fiction.
Oh, that's great. I do like dense little one-liners almost that you have to think about again.
Yes, and the way they're presented, of course, on the page with so much space. It's so funny when I was looking at this, and Nick looked over my shoulder and said, I said, in the Middle Ages, you wouldn't be wasting all that space, would you? It'd be packed. We wouldn't do poems like little short ones like that. And I thought, that's true. But we like our space, don't we, now? And it's a luxury. It makes you read and reread.
Yeah.
Because the downside, if you're writing these things, I suppose, is that it's you've got nowhere to hide, have you? The shorter the poem, the more it's going to get dissected syllable by syllable.
My read necessitated me looking back at some poems by Ted Hughes, and I've got a collection of his, new and selected. But you've got all these poems kind of on, running over on all the pages, and they don't have enough space. I just find it really off-putting.
Yes, I mean, that was the way, wasn't it? This having a large space around poems, is that a relatively new stylistic thing? I
love the idea of, a poem having a visual impact.
Me too, yeah.
Even if it's just a poem with 8 lines in 2 stanzas, there's something elegant about just that cleanness. Yeah.
Your cat in the background.
When Lorraine and I moved in together, we both had a cat. Mine was, obviously, as a writer's cat, had a fantastically pretentious name by Calliope, the muse of epic poetry. Whereas Lorraine and Betty's cat was called Brian.
So you've been reading something. She sounds excitedly.
I've honestly had a really bad cold, and obviously a man cold, so it's been terrible. I just couldn't read anything heavy, and the first sort of, inverted commas, heavy-ish thing I decided to read was this book called Grief is the Thing with Feathers, because it's a sort of hybrid of prose and poetry, but extremely readable. And it was a massive bestseller and won so many awards and has been garlanded and fated all over the place. Typically, it's taken me about 6 years to get round to actually reading it. But
I've not even heard of it. So, and now I'm a complete ignoramus. So
the story of it: there's a horrible domestic accident, leaves a young father and 2 boys motherless. So it's a sudden bereavement, and this book is about that bereavement. Max Porter, the author, is really into Ted Hughes. So the thing that comes to console them, this bereaved family, is a sort of giant crow. There's a terrible sadness about the subject matter, but it's kind of not always a really dark sort of read. Anybody that writes anything is in the business of trying to create emotions, but because the subject matter is one of bereavement, your sympathy is created immediately. But the book doesn't let you down. It's sort of dark and darkly comic, but very touching and very human. So in the story, the father is writing a book about Ted Hughes, and there's a scene where the writer goes as an 18-year-old, which also feels very autobiographical, to see Ted Hughes talk and briefly meets Ted. I started kind of looking back at Ted Hughes's Crow book, which is kind of, I'm not going to go into here, but it's sort of very dark.
Oh, yes, it is, isn't it? Yeah.
And kind of sort of mythological. And he wrote it, the bookends of it was the death of Sylvia Plath and then his lover, Asia Weevil, both by suicide. But this book draws on that kind of weird, tempestuous kind of imagery, but the crow in this is almost quite comforting, although it's dark, and it's a really fascinating hybrid of prose and poetry. And it's kind of, we're looking at it's sort of divided into little monologues from Crow or Dad or the boys, or it's just called Boys. If I read a little extract, it gives you a flavour of just how close to poetry it is. So this is a kind of monologue from The Crow. Very romantic how we first met. Badly behaved. Trip-trap. 2-bed upstairs flat. Spit level. Slight barbed error. Snuck in easy through the wall and up the attic bedroom to see those cotton boys silently sleeping. Intoxicating hum of innocent children, lint, flack, gack, pack, knack. The whole place was a heavy mourning, every surface dead mum, every crayon, tractor, coat, welly, covered in a film of grief. Down the dead mum's stairs, plinkety-plink curled claws whisper, down to Daddy's recently mum and Dad's bedroom. I was Herne the hunter, hornless, funt, munt, here he is, out, drunk for white. I bent down over him and smelt his breath, notes of rotten hedge, blue bottles. I prized open his mouth and counted bones, snacked a little on his unbrushed teeth, flossed him, Crowley kissed his tongue hither, thither. I lifted the duvet, I Eskimo kissed him, I butterfly kissed him, I flat flutter Jenny Wren kissed him, his lint, toe jam rint, fuck sack sad and cosy, sagging, gently rising, then down, rising, then down, rising, then down. I was praying, the breathing and the epidermis whispered, flesh, ah, and it was beautiful for me, rising just like me, then down, just like me, pan-shaped, just like me. It was any wonder the facts of my arrival under his sheets didn't lift him. Stench, rot, yacht, not. Wake up, human. Bird feathers up your crack, down your cock-eye, in your mouth. But he slept, and the bedroom was a mausoleum. He was an accidental remnant, and I knew this was the best gig, a real bit of fun. I put my claw on his eyeball and weighed up, gouging it out for fun or mercy. I plucked one jet feather from my hood and left it on his forehead for his head, for a souvenir, for a warning, for a lick of night in the morning, for a little break in the morning. I will give you something to think about, I whispered. He woke up and didn't see me against the blackness of his trauma. Go easy, he clapped. Go easy.
Gosh.
So that's kind of very early on when the sort of crows taking residence in the house.
Fabulous language, that all those repetitive curt sounds and the clipped choices of words and the blue bottle stench and, oh God, yeah.
Yeah, really great writing. It was actually, that particular passage was reminding me of Under Milk Wood by Dylan Thomas or something, that really kind of muscular, sound-led poetry.
And it has also got that Ted Hughes sort of, the view of a pig and, those sorts of poems about dead animals and...
Yeah. I discovered something about myself reading this, that I'm an absolute unspeakable pedant, because there's
was there an apostrophe in the wrong place?
Well, it's, this kind of idea of the one hill you're going to die on, kind of, the one sort of pedantic little thing that... But as a kid, I happened to be really interested in fish. I used to, when I lived in Guernsey, go fishing and hop in and out of rock pools, and then I used to keep tropical aquariums. For a lot of my life, I've had fish. I just know about fish, and there's a passage in this where the boys talk about finding a guppy in a rock pool and killing it. And a guppy is a kind of aquarium fish that originates in Mexico and is freshwater fish, and what they're referring to is a goby.
Oh no, that's quite an error then.
Yeah, because a guppy would die instantly, or very quickly, in the salt water of a rock pool. It's only a sad case like me but I just thought this has won all these awards. It's been through so many readers. It's published by Faber's. I just can't believe it's gone through all those things and still have, to me, in my little pedant's fish knowledge corner, just kind of this glaring mistake.
But that's exactly the sort of thing, isn't it? That editors or whatever, novel, you think that would be picked up on, but yeah, unless you've got that knowledge. But I know what you mean, because I've more than once seen something in from a respectable publisher, some tiny idiosyncrasy to do with, say, music, that sometimes slips through, and it's not the misspelling of the word chord. That's very common.
Yeah.
But something like that something similar is just saying, if you know when something's wrong, then it does jump out at you, doesn't it?
When I read it, I was sitting on the sofa next.
You fell off the sofa
next to Lorraine, and I was just like, no, kind of, and it's just pathetic. It's like, it's like, it actually annoyed me, I just didn't think I was that kind of person, but it seems that I am.
Oh, well, there we are. Pedant's Corner, that's good. All the books that we refer to in this episode are on our website, planetpoetrypodcast.com. So next time is going to be our last episode before Christmas.
Yeah.
So we've got some special things, haven't we?
Baubles.
We've got baubles, holly. We've also got another first. I'm going to be talking with Sharon Black and Di Slaney. A conversation with two people at the same time. So there's going to be three of us in the conversation. How is this possible? So the next episode is going to be a little bit earlier, isn't it? It's going to go out on a Tuesday rather than a Thursday. So it'll be Tuesday, the 21st of December.
We want to make sure it's all downloadable, so when you're kind of lying around groaning from stuffing yourself with turkey or a vegan alternative, that you're feeling relaxed and able to allow some poetry to drift into your festive fog.
Absolutely, and I think it will be the perfect digestif.
Ooh. That's a drink, isn't it? I'm not very good at this sort of thing.